Okay, so in this section we are going to take the information that we learned about the interface MIB and use it to create a custom collection. So the relevant things we need to know is which of the attributes we want to use as a label. So in this case we've decided to pick on IMCCustomIndexConfigurationPart1, which is that OID number. And then when we create the MIB formula, we're just going to bring back the octet strings, which are that value there. So that's 1361116. Okay. So set this up. We go to Resource, Performance Manager, Global Indexes. So that's Resource, Performance Manager, Global Indexes. And then what we do from here is we click on Add Custom Index. Now, this can seem a little bit awkward, but once you get the hang of it, it's not too bad. So, what I need to do is I need to give it a name. So I'm going to call it EJ Input Octet Values. Okay, so I'm actually going to pick a different one because I've already got one set up with 16. So I'm going to pick, for what we're going to do is I'm going to do the input octets, which is number 10. Okay. So, first thing we do when we create this MIB collection is we specify what unit we want to work with. So, in the case of this one, I'm going to say packets. So I can either say packets or bits. So it actually comes in as the octets is measured in bytes. So packets is probably the most appropriate one to go for. So I'll just go for bytes. So I'm going to go for bytes. Then we specify the type that we want it to have. Okay, so again, this is a where we specify the index that we need to use. Now, in order to work out what this needs to do, we look up here. So the type of index defines the format of the index. Okay, so there's an example. So I have to define, I say index, I give it a number, so in this case it will be index 1, and then I either put in a 0 or a 2. So if we look at the notes, 0 indicates a MIB leaf node, while 2 indicates a non-leaf node. Going back to my MIB 3, the values that I'm going to bring back, these are leaf nodes. You can't go any further. Okay, that's as far as you go with them in the MIB tree. So in that case, we know that the starting type I need to put in here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to put it in a bigger text file so you can see it easier. Font 14. Okay. So if I just copy, so I know that in order the name I have to start it with is I put in a square bracket. So what I'm telling IMC here is how, when it retrieves this data, how it works out which of it relates to the index value. So that when it retrieves the label and it works out the formula, it puts the two together properly. So in our example, we saw that the IF description is what we want to use as the label, and then the in octets is what we're going to use as the value or the formula. So we start off with, so it's index 1, square bracket, and we know from reading the notes that it's a leaf. Well, I told you it's a leaf. We know it's a leaf node, so we have to put a 0 in there. Close the square bracket. Then we've got the next thing we need to put in is the name we want to give it. So this is the name that's going to appear in IMC for this value. So I'm just going to call it in octets. Colon. Okay. Next thing we need to do is, so once we've got that done, then the next thing we need to do is we do in octets. The next thing I need to specify then is the type, so it's this value here. So looking at the comments, it says type field indicates an integer, which is 2. An integer which is 0, and 2 indicates a string. Sorry, 1 in the type field indicates an integer, and 2 equals a string. So we know that the index value is an integer, so we put a 1 in there, and then we got colon. So next I need, so I'm up to here, so I've done the index. I've specified whether there's a leaf node. I've given the metric a name. I've told it that it's going to be a integer type index value, and then the last thing I put in here is the length. So if I read the notes again, it tells me that use 0 for integer indexes or non-hierarchical indexes. So this is an integer index and it only goes down to one level, so we put a 0 in there, square bracket. So I know that seems a little bit awkward, but the good news is most of the standard MIB tables you work with, this is the format that you'll use. So you'll give it the index 1. It's normally going to be a leaf node. The name you want to give the metric, and then a :1 or :0. Okay, so that's what I'm going to put in to that field. So Control and C that. In we go. Control V. Okay, next thing I want to specify is what I want to use as the label. So when we bring this information back, we're going to use the IF description as the label. So to do that, I go back to the table, I click on IF description. So the OID number that I want to use is that. Now I can either copy and paste this in, which is what I'm going to do in my case, or what I could do is click on the select OID button, which will bring up the MIB browser, and then I can drill through it. So I can go to MIB table, ISO, org, DOD, internet, management, MIB2, interface, interface table, interface entry, and then I can select IF description and then just click OK. So I can either way. Okay, now down here I'm going to put in the formula that I want to use. So the formula depends on what data you're bringing back. In the case of IF octets, in octets, so IF in octets, clear, get all, then what we can see from bringing back two values, this is a counter, which means it just keeps going up. And looking at the MIB definition, it's a 32-bit counter. Okay, so every time a new octet comes into this interface, the counter increments by 1. When the counter reaches the top level, which it tells you here in the description, then the count will reset itself back to 0 and then carry on. So if I want to record the amount of octets that come into the device, I can do it one of two ways. If I just specified that I want to bring in IF in octets, then the value that I'm sampling will just keep going up and up and up and reset. But what I actually want to do is I probably want to calculate it as a rate. So what I really want to do is I want to say, right, you sample the value, you get it. In the polling frequency, you sample it again. And what I actually wanted to do is I would probably wanted to take the difference between the two values and then divide it by the time or the polling frequency, because I probably would want it as a rate. Okay, so to do that in IMC, I know that's the OID number of the value I want to measure. I go down to the formula box, and what I can specify here is if I just put the value in like so, then every time I collect this information, I'm just collecting the raw value and I'm storing it. But that's not actually what I want to do. What I want to do is I wanted to do a delta. So I wanted to sample the value, take it from the previous value, or the previous value from it, and then divide it by the frequency. So again, looking at the notes in the help, we can work out what we need to do here. So it tells us that if we want to store the delta, just the delta on its own, then you say the metric minus the metric, and then I need to put a quotation mark at the end. So this is just the way they've designed the parser in IMC to do this. So once IMC sees this format, it knows that it selects the value, the next polling cycle bring back the same metric, and then store in the database the difference between the two values. So that's the first thing that I need to do. But what I actually want to do is I want to do is a rate. So what I do in that case is I put it between parentheses, and then I say I want to divide that by the polling frequency. And again, if you look in the help, it tells you what the format for it is. It's /t. So you just do /t. Okay, so again, I'm going to put that into a bigger window so we can see it. So that's what we got for our type field. Then the instance field, and the formula. So I'll just copy and paste that in there. So that's your formula there. Okay, so we just need to make that bigger. Okay, and then the instance field was that figure there. Control C. Okay, so that is our definition. So we've given it our metric a name. We've told it the unit that we want to use. So we've picked what we feel is the most appropriate unit. We can create our own, so we can use a custom name if we wish. We then specify the index, and we read the notes to work out what the index needs to be. So the good news is most standard MIB tables, that's the format you're putting in there. So the only bit you really need to modify is the name that you want to give the metric. So in this case we're calling it in octets. Then you specify which part of the table you want to use for the label for each value, which in this case we picked IF description. And then the formula that we want to do is we want to bring back the in octets and calculate it as a rate by subtracting the previous value from it and then dividing it by the polling frequency.